Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into this week's video on the Spark Your Speaking channel. Today I'm going to talk about 4 ways to tell a powerful story when public speaking. My name is Kathy Lee and I'm your public speaking coach. In the last 2 videos, I taught you why your story is powerful and ways to determine what your story is. And all of these tips will help elevate you as a public speaker and presenter. The greatest public speakers all have stories to tell, and being able to do this has made them successful and sets them apart from everyone else. Now, if you've tuned into the other 2 videos, you may be at a point where you're like, okay, Kathy, I think I have my story, but how do I tell it? For those of you who haven't thought about storytelling in your presentation yet, I encourage you to go watch the other 2 videos to help you figure out what stories you can put in your presentations. Because trust me, this will be a game changer for you. Telling stories is an art form. There are people who naturally are great storytellers and keep you captivated, and there are those who ramble on or lose their place in the story and then eventually lose their audience. So in order to keep your thoughts organized, we need to have some structure to your story. First off, we need to keep it simple. Don't have too many plots or the story will be too long and confusing. Remember, 1 plot per story. So what I like to do before I dive into structuring my story is figure out what the point of the story is. What is the climax of the story? Because this is the reason you're telling your story in the first place. Determine that first. If we are going back to our fictional business person character that I've been talking about in the last couple of videos, you know, the person whose store flooded and they lost everything. Well, the climax of the story would be that their store flooded and they lost everything. That's the point that you eventually want to get to. Don't reveal it right away at the start, because like any good story, we want to develop into that climax, right? The climax is going to be the high point of your story, which takes us to my second tip. Develop your story to the high point. We want listeners and our audience to go on a journey with us, right? Don't give away the peak of your story right away. We want to build that momentum, that suspense to get them to that point. During this development stage, you are going to want to give some background to your story and in a chronological order. So chronological order is in the order which the events occurred from start to last, okay? I find a chronological order is the best way to keep your story organized. Now, there may be lots of elements that you can add for background. I wouldn't give them all because it might be too long. I'd only choose 2 or 3 main points to help build your story. Make sure these points are impactful and make sense for your story. So for our example, let's say our business person decides to talk about why they got into business in the first place. They can talk about their passions and why it was their dream. They can then talk about all the sacrifices they made to finally open their store. And they can even talk about what it was like to finally realize their dreams of opening a store. And then suddenly the unthinkable happens, and that's when the business person gets into the nitty-gritty of the flood. Remember, for each supporting element in the development of your story, you need to also make sure that it's to the point and simple as well. Try not to go off on a tangent. You want to remain focused when you're telling your story. This next tip I have is about how you tell the story versus structure. So when you tell your story, make sure to paint the picture. What I mean by paint the picture is really take your audience on a journey and try to reel them in to your story. And one of the best ways to do that is by using adjectives and adverbs and describing the scenario using the 5 senses. For instance, what was the air like? Was there a smell? What emotions were you going through? Things like that. As an example, if we were getting to the climax of the business person's story and about to describe the flood, I'd answer all those questions I just asked. Perhaps the air was damp and cold in the store post-flood. Maybe there was a sewage smell that they'll never forget. Utter devastation is probably how this person felt. Perhaps they described that. Maybe they dropped to their knees and cried out loud or something. There are so many ways you can tell a story, but if you inject some color and specific details, it will really help you bring in your audience and make your story unforgettable. And before we get to my fourth point, I just want to thank you again for tuning in. Remember to join our public speaking community by hitting the subscribe button below to get weekly free public speaking and training videos. My last tip is to have a resolution. Every story needs some kind of resolution. In the example of the business person, if they were able to overcome the store flooding and rebuild again, then that's the resolution. They would end their story on hope and resilience. And this is a perfect way to connect with the audience. Perhaps in the resolution, you can offer your audience some learning lessons or food for thought. But let's say the resolution isn't positive. Let's say that the business person wasn't able to salvage their business. Because in real life, that can happen. In that case, I'd be honest with the audience about the outcome of the situation, okay? Because not everything works out. But maybe the speaker can still offer some advice on how they're moving forward or what their next plans are. They can share some lessons that were learned, which will help them connect with the audience as well, okay? So whether the resolution is good or bad, first of all, be honest about it. But there still is always a lesson to be learned, even if it's a negative outcome, and that can still be helpful to the audience. Well, that's all for today, everyone. Just to recap, 4 ways to tell a powerful story when public speaking are: keep it simple, develop your story to the high point or the climax, make sure to paint the picture, and have a resolution. Now, if you like this video and found it helpful, remember to hit the like button below and share it so that others can benefit as well. If you have any questions or topic ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you would like to learn more about the other public speaking programs that I have to offer, make sure to check out sparkyourspeaking.com. See you next week.